I want to start this by saying I never meant to be the villain in someone else's story. But sitting here, in the suffocating quiet of my friend's guest room, scrolling through Instagram at 3 a.m., I'm starting to realize that's exactly what I've become. The blue light of the screen illuminates the unpacked boxes in the corner, a sad monument to a life I blew up. My name is Alara, I'm 32, and I need to tell you how one stupid, wine-fueled comment at a party destroyed the careful house of cards I'd built my life on. You know those nature documentaries where a tiny shift in the ecosystem causes a catastrophic chain reaction? That's what happened here. Except the ecosystem was my marriage, and the tiny shift was me finally saying out loud what I'd been thinking for years. But I should probably start at the beginning, back when I thought I had everything figured out, back when I thought I was in control. I met Silas 7 years ago at my cousin's baby shower. He was the photographer, and honestly, I barely noticed him at first. He was this bigger guy with kind, crinkly eyes and a camera that seemed permanently attached to his hand, just part of the background while I was consumed by my own drama. See, back then, I was wrapped up in Declan. Just thinking his name still brings a phantom ache. He was a pharmaceutical rep, and if you could distill every hot guy from a dating app into one person, you'd get him. Tall, impossibly fit, drove a Tesla, and carried himself with the easy confidence of someone who had never been told no. We had this insane physical chemistry, a magnetic pull that felt like destiny. But for the nearly 2 years we were a thing, he kept me at arm's length, always with the same line. I'm just not ready for anything serious, Alara. I spent those years making excuses for him. I bought designer clothes I couldn't afford on a nurse's salary, trying to fit into his luxurious world. I pretended it didn't slice me open when he'd ghost me for weeks, only to show up at my apartment at 2 a.m. with a charming smile, like nothing had happened. My life revolved around the hope that one day, he'd wake up and realize I was the one. Meanwhile, Silas kept showing up. He was a friend of my cousin's, and he was at every family event, every mutual friend's party. He'd always make a point to talk to me. He'd ask about my nursing career, remember little details about stories I'd told months ago. He asked me out maybe 4 or 5 times over those years. I always had some excuse. I'm kind of seeing someone, I'd say, even if Declan hadn't texted me back in 2 weeks. Looking back, what really got to me was how Silas never seemed bothered by my rejections. He'd just smile that warm, easy smile and say, "All right, maybe next time," before going back to making everyone else laugh with his corny dad jokes. It was like he was so comfortable in his own skin, even though he didn't look like the guys I usually dated. I didn't understand that kind of confidence back then. To me, confidence came from a 6-pack and a platinum credit card. Everything changed the year I turned 30. I found out Declan got a job offer in Seattle not from him, but from his sister's gushing Facebook post. 3 months later, my Instagram feed was a minefield of him and a yoga instructor named Summer doing headstands on the beach, tagging each other in inspirational quotes about finding your soulmate. I was a mess. 30 years old, $50,000 in credit card debt from trying to keep up with Declan's lifestyle, and suddenly, painfully aware that all my friends were getting married and having kids. I was still clinging to a fantasy. That's when I started looking at Silas differently. He had his own successful photography business, shooting high-end weddings and corporate events. He owned a cute little house in a good neighborhood. He wasn't living some flashy, extravagant life, but he was stable, secure, safe. When he asked me out again at another friend's wedding, I said yes. I told myself I was being mature, finally choosing substance over surface. But here's the truth. The one I've never told anyone until now. I was terrified of ending up alone, and Silas felt like my last chance at a normal life. I knew the physical attraction might be an issue, a big one, so I came up with a plan. On our 3rd date, I told him I was celibate until marriage. I'd seen it work for my super religious cousin. Her husband waited 2 years. Silas, being the genuine, respectful person he is, completely accepted it. He never pressured me, never complained. Which, of course, only made me feel worse about the lie. We dated for 8 months before he proposed. Everyone said it was fast, but I was already past 30, and it just seemed like, why wait? The clock was ticking, and Silas was a sure thing. The engagement party was the first time I tried to force it, to convince myself to be physically intimate. But I couldn't. I kept making excuses, stress from wedding planning, a nagging headache, an early shift at the hospital. The wedding itself was a blur. It was small, just family and close friends. I remember standing there in my white dress, looking at Silas in his tux, thinking, this is fine, this is good enough, love will grow, My maid of honor caught me crying in the bathroom and assumed they were happy tears. They weren't. They were tears of quiet desperation. I genuinely believed something would change after we were married. I thought some switch would flip, and I'd suddenly find myself attracted to my own husband. Instead, I just found myself inventing more excuses. I started working extra shifts at the hospital just to avoid coming home. I secretly opened new credit cards to buy things that gave me a fleeting sense of control: designer bags, expensive skincare, memberships to boutique workout classes I never attended. The girls at work became my main outlet. The hospital break room turned into my personal therapy session turned roast. During breaks, I'd vent about how frustrating it was watching Silas struggle with his weight. He was trying, bless his heart. He was going to the gym, meal prepping all that bland chicken and broccoli. But it wasn't the dramatic transformation I secretly hoped for. I'd see these fit doctors at work, especially Dr. Alistair Vance with his perfect jawline and Peloton-toned physique, and just feel cheated. It felt like I'd settled for a lottery ticket that was never going to pay out. The worst part was, by every objective measure, Silas was a great husband. He supported my career, listened to my stories about difficult patients, and made me laugh with his goofy sense of humor. He remembered every anniversary and birthday. He'd wake up early to make me coffee before my 6 a.m. shifts, even if he'd been up until 2 a.m. editing photos. When I was stressed, he'd run me bubble baths and leave little encouraging notes around the house. But every time he touched my arm, I had to fight the urge to pull away. Every time he initiated intimacy, I'd find some excuse. I have an early shift tomorrow. I have a brutal migraine. I'm just too stressed from work. The lies became so routine I almost believed them myself. I was living a double life. The supportive wife on the surface, and a cauldron of resentment underneath. And now, after what happened at that hospital staff party, I'm realizing that maybe I wasn't just lying to him. Maybe I've been lying to myself this whole time about what kind of person I am. It all came to a head at that stupid hospital staff party. I didn't even want him to come. But Silas had just finished a huge wedding shoot in Chicago and was in such a good mood. He kept talking about how excited he was to finally meet my work friends, since I talked about them so much. If I'd known how it would all play out, maybe I would have faked a stomach bug. Or maybe, if I'm being really honest with myself, some dark part of me wanted everything to blow up. I was tired of holding it all in. The party was at my friend Lorelai's house, one of those cute craftsman homes she'd bought with her surgeon husband. The kind of house Silas and I could probably afford if I hadn't been secretly maxing out credit cards for years. Everyone from our cardiac floor was there, plus some doctors and their spouses. I started drinking wine the minute we walked in, trying to calm the vibrating wire of anxiety I felt about my two worlds colliding. To my surprise, Silas was actually doing great at first. He was charming everyone with stories about crazy wedding photos and entitled bridezillas. He had this natural way of storytelling that made everyone laugh, and I could see my coworkers warming up to him. Even Dr. Vance seemed impressed by some of Silas's corporate photography clients. Then Lorelai brought out the food, a huge decadent spread. I watched in horror as Silas filled his plate with macaroni and cheese, buffalo wings, and a pile of bacon-wrapped dates. My coworker Cassia, who'd heard all my break room rants about his eating habits, caught my eye from across the room and smirked. I was on my third glass of wine by then, feeling that dangerous mix of anxiety and liquid courage. Dr. Vance came over while Silas was deep in conversation with a surgical resident about camera equipment. He looked incredible in a fitted blue button-down that showed off his gym results. The wine must have made me brave, because I found myself flirting more obviously than usual, laughing too loud at his jokes, touching his arm when he said something funny. I kept glancing at Silas, almost daring him to notice, to get jealous, to do something. But he was completely oblivious, showing someone pictures on his camera, laughing about some wedding disaster. That just made me more annoyed. How could he not see how miserable I was? That's when Lorelai started the party game. A twisted version of Never Have I Ever where you had to explain your answers. Everyone was pretty tipsy by then, sharing increasingly personal stories. Someone said, "Never have I ever faked being too tired for sex." Oh. All the women started laughing, sharing stories about headaches and early meetings. When the attention turned to me, I don't know what possessed me. Maybe it was the wine. Maybe it was seeing Dr. Vance start to flirt with one of the new pharmacy techs. Maybe it was just years of resentment finally bubbling over like acid. "Oh my God, I'm the queen of fake headaches," I heard myself say, way too loud. The room chuckled, but I didn't stop. The filter between my brain and my mouth had completely dissolved. I mean, sorry, honey, but when you're breathing heavy just walking up the stairs, I can't exactly get in the mood. A few people laughed nervously, but I kept going, a runaway train of cruelty. I mean, I love him, but I told him I was celibate before marriage because I couldn't figure out how to say, I'm not attracted to you, but you're stable and nice. Like, what was I supposed to say? Hey, you're a great guy, but the thought of you touching me makes me want to cry? The room went dead quiet. You know that moment in movies where the record scratches? It was exactly like that, except 1,000 times worse because it was real. I turned my head and there was Silas. He was standing in the doorway between the kitchen and the living room, holding 2 fresh drinks in his hands. He'd gone to get us refills. The look on his face? I'd never seen him look like that before. It was a shattering of something pure. His hands were shaking so badly he spilled both drinks all over Lorelei's expensive antique rug. Dr. Vance cleared his throat and suddenly needed to make a phone call. Cassia wouldn't even meet my eyes. Lorelei, who'd been my work bestie for 3 years, just looked at me and whispered, Jesus Christ, Alara. The worst part? Silas didn't storm out. He didn't yell. He just calmly set the empty glasses down on a side table, walked over to me, and said, his voice barely a whisper, I think we should head home. The car ride was silent. Not the normal, angry kind of silent after a fight, but this heavy, final kind of silence. The air was thick with what I had done. I tried to explain, my words slurring from the wine. I told him he was being too sensitive, that it was just a stupid party game, that everyone says things they don't mean when they're drinking. He just kept driving. His hands gripped so tight on the steering wheel his knuckles were white. He didn't look at me once. When we got home, I thought maybe we'd have it out, a screaming match that would clear the air, and everything would go back to our dysfunctional normal. Instead, he walked into the living room, turned on a lamp, and faced me. The look in his eyes wasn't angry. It was worse. It was clear. He said something that made my blood run cold. I've been working with a therapist for the past 6 months, Alara. My mouth went dry. Not just about my weight, he continued, his voice scarily calm. About us. About how you make me feel. I just never had the courage to admit what I knew deep down. And that's when he told me he knew everything. He knew about the secret credit cards. A joint account alert he'd set up years ago had notified him of a credit inquiry in my name that I never told him about. He'd done some digging. He knew about the things I said about him at work. Apparently, one of the nurses I thought was my friend has a spouse who sometimes works as a second shooter for Silas's company. They'd been keeping him informed. He even knew about Dr. Vance and how my behavior changed whenever he was around. I kept telling myself it would get better, he said, his voice hollow. I thought if I just tried harder, lost more weight, made more money, you'd finally see me. But that's not the problem, is it, Alara? The problem is you never saw me at all. You just saw a solution to your Declan problem. My world tilted on its axis. I tried to turn it around on him, my voice rising with panic. I told him he violated my privacy by having people spy on me. I asked him why he never confronted me about the credit cards if he knew. I reminded him that he wasn't exactly Mr. Perfect himself. He just looked at me, a deep, weary sadness in his eyes, and started packing a bag. Where are you going? I demanded, following him into the bedroom. You can't just leave. We need to talk about this. He turned to me, his face set like stone. No, he said, the word sharp and final. We needed to talk about this 2 years ago, before you married me under false pretenses. We needed to talk about this every time you made me feel less than human with a backhanded comment. We needed to talk about this before you humiliated me in front of your entire workplace, but now, I'm done talking. He walked out that night with just one duffel bag. I stayed up until 4 a.m., sitting on our couch, waiting for him to cool off and come back. He'd always come back before. After every snippy comment, every joke about his weight, every time I rejected his touch. But this time was different. This time, I'd crossed a line I could never uncross. The next day, I called in sick to work, sending my manager, Margaret, a vague text about a stomach bug. She replied with just, "Take all the time you need." Something about her tone made me wonder if she already knew. Word travels fast in hospital circles, and I'd basically nuked my marriage in front of half the cardiac floor staff. By day 3, I was getting desperate. Silas hadn't answered any of my 50-plus calls or texts. His brother came by to get more of his things, clothes, his backup camera equipment, his home office computer. I tried to explain my side to him, but he just looked at me with this unnerving mix of disgust and pity. You know what's crazy, Alara? He said while packing up Silas's favorite coffee mug. If you'd been honest from the start, you could have had a real friend in Silas. Instead, you used him as a backup plan and treated him like garbage when he didn't magically turn into Declan. I wanted to argue, but the words stuck in my throat, because he was right. When I finally dragged myself back to work, it was worse than I had imagined. You know that scene in movies where someone walks in and all conversation stops? It's real. The morning huddle was excruciating. Nobody would make eye contact with me, except for Margaret, and that was only to tell me I'd been reassigned to the geriatric ward, away from Dr. Vance's cardiac unit. It's not personal, she said, but her tone made it clear it was absolutely personal. We just feel this assignment better suits the current situation. Translation: they didn't trust me around the doctors anymore. Everyone knew what kind of person I really was now. Lorelei, my supposed best work friend, switched her break schedule to avoid me. When I finally cornered her in the supply closet, she just shook her head. You don't get it, do you? She said, her voice low and furious. It's not just what you said at the party. It's the fact that we've all been enabling your behavior for months. Every time you came to us complaining about Silas, we should have called you out. Instead, we just nodded along. I tried to explain that I was just venting, like everyone does. No, Alara, she cut me off. We vent about our husbands leaving dishes in the sink. You systematically destroyed that man's self-esteem while lying to him, and racking up secret debt. And now you're playing the victim because it blew up in your face. Dr. Vance acted like I didn't exist. Turns out his wife is a big client of Silas's. They'd hired him for their daughter's wedding last year. Small world. He told Margaret he didn't want me assisting on any of his cases anymore. The final, public humiliation came about a week later. A courier walked right up to the nurse's station, in front of everyone, and announced my name before handing me a thick manila envelope. Inside were the divorce papers, and tucked in with them was a detailed account of everything. Printouts of the credit card statements, screenshots of texts where I'd mocked Silas to Cassia, and even sworn affidavits from 2 coworkers about my breakroom rants. He was requesting that I be responsible for all my credit card debt in the divorce, since I had opened the cards fraudulently during our marriage. Do you know how much that is? I'd been transferring balances and opening new cards for so long, playing this shell game, that I'd lost track. When I finally sat down and added it all up, the number stared back at me from the calculator screen: $47,000. I owed $47,000 that I had absolutely no way to pay. My life unraveled with terrifying speed. My lawyer, the only one who would take my case after 3 others turned me down, said I should seriously consider bankruptcy. But that would mean a mark on my record that could jeopardize my nursing license. I'd have to start completely over, at 32, with no husband, no career, and no prospects. Meanwhile, the irony was so thick you could choke on it. Silas's photography business was booming. It turns out being the quiet, dignified victim of a toxic marriage gave him this whole new brand narrative. He started doing a photo series on Instagram called Transformation and Self-Worth, and it went viral. Everyone loves a good glow-up story, especially when there's a villain to root against, and I was definitely the villain. I thought rock bottom was the party. Then I thought it was getting served divorce papers at work. But rock bottom keeps getting lower. I had to pick up a second job to make the minimum payments on my credit cards, doing DoorDash deliveries after my nursing shifts. One night, I was picking up an order at a trendy new restaurant downtown, and there they were, Silas and his new girlfriend. I'd heard rumors, but seeing them together in person was a physical blow. She's a pediatric surgeon, of course Island Dr. Annalise Rowe. She wasn't Instagram model gorgeous. She had this natural, confident beauty that comes from being comfortable in your own skin. They were sitting at a corner table, sharing an appetizer and laughing at something on his phone. He looked amazing. It wasn't just the weight loss, he'd lost almost 60 pounds since moving out. It was everything. A new haircut, stylish clothes, an energy of pure happiness that radiated off him. I stood there, frozen, holding someone else's pad thai, watching my ex-husband live the life I always thought I wanted. The worst part? When he finally noticed me, standing there in my ridiculous DoorDash t-shirt, he just gave me a small, polite nod. Like I was a distant acquaintance he vaguely recognized from high school. No anger, no satisfaction, not even pity, just acknowledgement, before turning back to his date. The old Silas would have been flustered, would have tried to make awkward small talk. This new Silas didn't even register me as important enough to interrupt his conversation. I called in sick to both jobs the next day and spent hours stalking their social media. They were training for a half marathon together. She left genuinely supportive comments on all his transformation posts. There was a photo of them at some charity 5 Kelvins, sweaty and laughing, arms wrapped around each other, looking like they actually wanted to be touching. His latest post twisted the knife. It was a long caption about finding unexpected joy after hardship. His girlfriend commented with a simple heart emoji. He replied, "Thank you for showing me what real love feels like." Less. As if that wasn't enough, I ran into Declan at the grocery store last week. He's in town more often for a new project. You know what he said to me? After 5 minutes of awkward small talk? Saw Silas at the gym yesterday. Man, what a great guy. Can't believe how you treated him. Declan. The man I spent years pining over, the very reason I settled for Silas in the first place, was now judging me for how I treated someone. The universe really does have a sick sense of humor. The divorce is almost final. I'm living in Lorelei's sister's guest room, drowning in debt, working 2 jobs where people either hate me or pity me. My ex-husband, on the other hand, is a local hero. A symbol of resilience. Sarah, the nurse who used to laugh at all my jokes about Silas, came up to me yesterday with this look of profound pity. "You know, it's crazy," she said, shaking her head. "If you had actually given him a chance, actually loved him for who he was, you could have had this amazing life. He was already successful, already kind, already devoted to you. But you couldn't see past his weight. And now look, he's got everything you ever wanted, just with someone who actually appreciates him." I wish I could say she's wrong. I wish I could say I've learned some profound lesson about inner beauty and acceptance. But honestly, the thing that keeps me up at night, staring at the ceiling in this borrowed room, isn't just that I hurt someone who loved me. It's that I had this whole life planned out: the successful husband, the big house, the perfect Instagram photos, and now he's living that life with someone else, while I'm here, telling my story to strangers on the internet, hoping someone, anyone, will tell me I'm not the bad guy. My sister says I need therapy, that I need to work on myself. She's probably right. But every time I think about talking to a therapist, I remember that Silas was in therapy because of me. That somewhere in this city, there's a professional who knows exactly what kind of person I am. The most recent development is the final nail in my coffin. Silas's journey is being turned into a documentary. Some indie filmmakers saw his transformation posts and reached out. It's going to focus on mental health, self-worth, and breaking free from toxic relationships. He's going to be the face of healing from emotional abuse, and I'm going to be the cautionary tale they whisper about. Everyone keeps saying this is karma. Maybe they're right. Or maybe the real karma isn't just getting what you deserve. Maybe it's having to watch the person you thought wasn't good enough become everything you ever wanted, while you finally realize you were the one who wasn't good enough all along. So yeah, that's my story. How I lost my husband, my friends, my reputation, and my financial stability, all because I couldn't appreciate what was right in front of me. Would I do things differently if I could go back? Probably. But not for the reasons everyone thinks. Not because I've had some grand epiphany about what truly matters. I'd do things differently because I didn't realize that the safe choice, the backup plan, the nice guy I settled for, he was actually the grand prize. And now someone else is living the life I could have had, while I'm here, alone, watching through a cracked phone screen as my ex-husband becomes an inspiration to thousands. And the worst part is, he's probably going to use this whole thing to win an award, while I'm still just trying to convince myself it wasn't all my fault.